And it's so interesting with this movie is that at the same time of no one really hearing about it, not knowing much about this movie, there's this massive lawsuit where a marketing agency is being sued $10 million for buying followers, for buying metrics to placate to the client to be like, no, like things are working, we're doing things, but effectively like embezzling. It's like a fraud lawsuit, like embezzling this massive budget to do nothing.
What a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand. Say it again now. What a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand.
Let's talk about The Strange Case of Strange Darlings. This is a movie that I don't think anyone has really heard anything about. And it's a perfect conversation as to why marketing strategy matters.
Well, I came about it. There's a YouTube movie critic that I love called The Critical Drinker that I recommend to everybody for his Scottish accent as he takes apart crappy movies and suggests good ones. And Strange Darling, by some people, is being compared to almost being as good as Silence of the Lambs, but it just completely failed at the box office. So I was looking into it and chatting with you about it, trying to figure out why it didn't do that well. And it turns out there's a giant marketing lawsuit going on. And it's an example of poor marketing and branding and affecting sales that I thought we would just chat about, because I know that there's a loyal group of people who love the movie and they're asking why it didn't do well.
Well, I mean, that's a massive comparison. Like, to say this movie is being compared to one of the most iconic movies of all time, it just shows you how important marketing and messaging is. Because I heard nothing about this movie. I thought it was the movie that, what's her name was in? Emma Stone.
Yeah.
Because it was a name similar to Strange Darlings.
And so when we were talking about it, Silence of the Lambs, we decided to kind of compare Silence of the Lambs, how it was promoted, to Strange Darlings in terms of title and the old classic movie poster that attracts you when you go to select a movie. And I know we looked at both of them. I thought it'd be awesome to talk about it because most people have seen Silence of the Lambs.
I haven't, actually.
You haven't?
No.
Oh my God, you gotta watch that.
I know.
Well, it may be premature. We haven't seen either of the movies, but if you look at, and we'll put up their movie poster boards, when you look at them, I think people should describe what do you get from each poster board. And the beauty of Silence of the Lambs is, one, it's like making good content online. There's a hook there. Silence of the Lambs, you're like, what does that mean, Silence of the Lambs? And and it's interesting because you understand the meaning later, but it's not what you think. But it creates ominousness, right? The Silence of the Lambs, you're like, what the hell is the Silence of the Lambs? And then the poster board is a moth, right? And so it creates a sense of eeriness that you can kind of expect something is going to come from this movie. Whereas when you look at Strange Darling, and it's a picture of a pretty lady, you don't get the sense that it's potentially as impactful as a psychological thriller as Silence of the Lambs.
No, it gives you nothing to desire, right? Like there's no space for curiosity, interpretation. Like it's not even artistic, it's purely just lazy.
Yeah.
And the reason why the Strange Darling case study is so fascinating is it kind of poses two questions. The first is, how do movies market in an age where they can no longer buy attention, right? Like for the longest time, movies like were only available to see in cinema. So seeing the poster was a billboard, because the only way to like really enjoy movies is like when you went to the movie theater. The second is they effectively had your attention during the previews because you couldn't pre-purchase your seat. So like you needed to get there early to like get a good seat. And before, like the only way to really like unwind or to chill out was to watch TV, and TV commercials or movie commercials were no joke. Like that's how you created buzz and hype, like to get people to the movies. Today, when you don't have any of those like forced places of attention, how do you drive hype? And it's so interesting with this movie is that at the same time of no one really hearing about it, not knowing much about this movie, there's this massive lawsuit where a marketing agency is being sued $10 million for buying followers, for buying metrics to placate to the client to be like, no, like things are working, we're doing things, but effectively like embezzling. It's like a fraud lawsuit, like embezzling this massive budget to do nothing.
So I think there's like almost marketing malpractice at the front end
Yeah.
in terms of, and this is what a problem is in marketing, is people are making like pretty or visually aesthetic things, but they don't have a hook, and it's related to content. You can make the best piece of content for YouTube or a video for TikTok, but if you don't capture attention in the first 5 seconds, nobody's going to see it.
Well, but it brings to a realization I've made as of recently that I want to double down into, is that we fixate so much on aesthetics, like maintaining a brand standard. And like that really matters. But it actually matters at a different stage in the journey. For many startups, which effectively like a movie is doing when it doesn't have like super famous actors in it that are like going to carry the PR, you have to care more about effectiveness than aesthetics alone. And I see it for a lot of small businesses. They're so focused on like the look and the feel for the brand that they're prepared, or they're not really prepared, to sacrifice how long it takes to grow by only focusing on aesthetics and not effectiveness. And you need to be launching tons of ships. Like you need, on average, 20 to 60 creatives per month to see a generation of sales. Now, all of that should have strategy. All of that should have like a plan and an angle to it. But it's often shocking the one that performs the best. And it's usually like a mix of things, like it's got the right cuts. It's not like as obvious as the one that looks the best.
Came across a great podcast that was talking about Apple, and we were talking about how, Steve Jobs was kind of an arbiter of taste. Like he really obsessed with design, and he would be brutal on people to make sure the design was perfect. And taste is actually something that you don't get from biz school. Like there's just few people who have it. Everybody thinks they have it, but the people who make iconic things that really connect, they generally have this sense of taste. And if we do a case study on this, like if you pull up the movie poster of Silence of the Lambs and you look at it, there's something about it that's interesting, right? You read it, you look at it, and to get to that level of interesting, it's not just putting a moth on a certain background and doing it in 15 minutes, right? To make art that makes people pay attention and listen or leaves an action, you really need people who are skilled and who fixate on the details. Whereas if you compare that to the Strange Darlings poster, it's a pretty profile picture.
But this is, you were correct. Here's where I would challenge the visual image that's at the top of like wherever it's streamed, like Netflix or whatever. One of the things that Netflix does that's odd, that isn't as intentional as you would think, is it takes like random clips from movies, and like the way that it makes almost like the landing page isn't at the rate of almost where it should be. Like it actually, it's an interesting like side conversation that I'm often finding, especially like classic movies, the still that Netflix pulls, or like the background image that Netflix pulls, isn't the best representation for the movie. And I don't think the movie has control over that. I do think that there's space for that whole page to be like actually a full like actually piece of real estate that like Netflix could sell to coming movies. And where I'm going with this is the problem with Strange Darlings. Yes, you're right. It extends to the cover image, but I think it's more than the cover image, because there's lots of movies or shows that we'll watch that get this like kind of tipping point hype where the still of the show isn't that intriguing or interesting. And there is something more to that like critical mass of what's happening, because I think Netflix doesn't provide the control necessary for that still cover art.
Yeah, remember, Netflix makes content internally to save from having to buy content, right? So Netflix will bring on a new release of something that had cinematic success. And so the one way you make money is if you have cinematic success in the pre-launch marketing, then Netflix pays for it, and then you watch it, right?
I'm saying the criticism for the Strange Darlings marketing is that they didn't get that hype. They didn't get that buzz.
In their pre-launch marketing,
phase.
yes. So it's alleged that the marketing company was providing fake numbers of likes that made the producers think they were getting the hype that they want, but they weren't getting the media placement. And they weren't getting the message out there for an opening day. It's hard to do that now. It's hard to get hype for a movie that's coming out on day one.
It's not, though. It's not if you had a $10 million marketing budget. That's the crux of this conversation we're having, is that it is that is the takeaway from this conversation is that what you're seeing at the Strange Darlings level is shocking, but not shocking because it never happens. It's that it usually doesn't happen to businesses at that scale. Marketing companies are stealing businesses' money every single day. And unfortunately, the person that's usually the most susceptible to that is the small and medium-sized business owner, because they don't know what questions to ask. They're so busy running a business. They don't have the benefit of being able to hire all these different salaries that can just overlook an agency. And it's not shocking that it happened to Strange Darling. It's just at the scale in which it happened at. That like they didn't ask questions sooner about the followers that they were purchasing and the vanity metrics that they were buying. Like we probably see at least 2 to 3 times a month brands that come in that have had followers purchased by an agency unbeknownst to them. And they think that they've got a lot of followers and they have like almost no engagement on their page. And it's very difficult for somebody else to come in and pick that up because we're working against an algorithm that's now working against you because like you've bought metrics.
Yeah, Strange Darling is just, it's a movie that has some crazy twists and it's a thriller, and it didn't come across. When I look at some of their online visuals, some of them are okay, but it's
But that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not the visuals. Like, it's their entire marketing strategy. It's how they hired a team, and the team didn't have the proper oversight to be ensure that they were doing what they were doing. And this happens every single day, but usually not to like big production movies.
I just think, but the point I think I'm making is, if the title is not good or the hook is not good of whatever content you're making, you can fail.
100%.
And we watched Hudsucker Proxy, right, which is a phenomenal movie.
By the Coen brothers.
Yeah, that didn't do that well, but spectacular movie. And maybe we could chat about what we were talking about.
Yeah,
there.
so we watched the Hudsucker Proxy. So I think a great connector to what we're saying about Strange Darlings is the Coen brothers' Hudsucker Proxy. Because both of these things happened to us kind of at the same time. Hudsucker Proxy is not a new movie. It's kind of like an alternative Christmas movie. Like, there's nothing actually like Christmassy about it, but like because I think it happens at Christmas, you get like, and it's like in New York during winter time, that it feels enough like it was the right time of year to watch that movie. And what was really interesting is the movie was actually fantastic. You and I both deduced that that's actually what made the Coen brothers, like the Coen brothers, is like the way that they approach, like how cerebrally, like the shots, like the narrative, the storyline, like the instruction on acting. Like, it was so odd, but so well executed. And we've both never heard about it. And it's because when you hear of the name Hudsucker Proxy, what does that even mean? Like, it's so hard to remember. It's not memorable. It's quite possibly the worst name. And why I think that's relevant is we talk about 4 pillars to a brand, right? Like a good brand needs a good product, a good story, a good experience, and consistency. And so many people think that if your product is good enough, the business will come. And that's like a quarter of the battle. Like, if your messaging sucks and you don't have a good strategy to go to market, you're not going to win.
There's also kind of a little arrogance that might come from the old way of doing things. Like, the one phrase that I hated when you try to get people to change is they're like, well, we've always done it that way.
Oh my God.
And I think in the old days, this may have been a story where there was less options for books. And so it was if you had a beautifully written book with critics, it would spread through critics and reviews, and the title didn't matter as much, right? Because you just have some things that are amazing books that didn't have good titles, and they do well because let me finish.
Okay.
Book critics were the key. So
100%.
if you put a great book in front of an influential book critic, it could do really well with a crappy title. In today's world where nobody is going to one book critic, where there's like 1,000 reviewers and there's 1,000 options, having the wrong title can make your product get left behind.
This is where I was just going to challenge you on it, though. I think that a good critic can give a product with not a great title a strong life. But I think where the difference is if it's a genuinely bad title. And like that's an
Yeah.
important difference, is that oftentimes it's not that it's great, it's not that it's the best, it's that it's good enough. And Hudsucker Proxy is a bad title.
Yeah, no, just think about how we talk about content.
But even Strange Darlings, we've been talking about this for 2 weeks. We both haven't even watched the movie.
Yeah.
And we now are convinced it's a hidden great gem that needs to be watched. And our attention spans are so short and in such demand that if we're not being sold that it's great.
But this is when I talk about taste, like the difference between success. Because if you compare the Coen brothers movie, The Big Lebowski, to Hudsucker Proxy, at first blanch, they could look like similar titles, right? But The Big Lebowski actually is really a hilarious way of naming something. Everybody wants to know, what the hell is a big... I'm not thinking, what is a Hudsucker Proxy? It seems too complex.
Well, there's no meaning derived from it, right? Like, proxy isn't a word we use colloquially every day. The Big Lebowski is like clearly someone's last name, and the cover was always him. And it with kind of like the bowling.
Why is he
kind
called
of,
Big?
No,
Like,
it makes enough sense that you're intrigued.
Or Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Like, interesting title.
But also, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It always had such an engaging visual cover. Like the two of them clearly breaking out of something like On the Run. Like it's, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is a great name. Like you can tell that it's a classic movie. Hudsucker Proxy.
I think it's like something about an airline industry. You don't like when you just hear it, but
to
then
me, it means absolutely nothing.
And then
it's
it
like an
had-
industrial complex.
yeah, and it had an image of a building. Right? It didn't talk about the coolness of that Christmas thing. And so the first thing we said when it was over, this is before we came across Strange Darlings, is that movie should have had a better name and more people would watch it.
Well, I kept racking my brain throughout the movie because I was like, I actually wanted to write it off before we watched it of like, this is stupid. And it was so good that and the question just becomes opportunity cost, right? Like, obviously it's by the Coen brothers. Obviously the Coen brothers are super successful. You know, they're among the best or the best. But imagine the opportunity cost if it had been better named. Like, regardless of whatever they've achieved, like imagine, just imagine, like what could that have meant if it had actually gotten the recognition that it could have deserved? And it's often worth it. It's just worth it for the sake of if it could have had more, give it more. And that's the kind of the question with Strange Darlings also is one of the Strange Darlings thing is super disappointing, but what's the opportunity cost? Literally in that case, everything. But and that's just the picture that we're painting is business owners beware. The sad reality is that if you're not inspecting, you can't expect greatness, especially when they don't have any skin in the game.
That's the old military maxim we've chatted about. You can only expect what you inspect, and if you just delegate, fire and forget, you know what I mean? You can be ripped off. So if you've got a long-standing relationship with somebody you trust and they've got a track record, then that's fine. But when it comes to busy founders, you can only expect what you inspect.
Yeah.
Right? And you got to go 2 to 3 questions deep because you can kind of be conned.
Yeah.
But my angle is different than yours. I think your message is awesome, but it's just taste and the artistic ability to actually do things well that seem simple. I think people who are very good at complex tasks undervalue how important it is to have somebody who knows how to artfully or tastefully create something that can contribute to the legacy of what you're building technically. Because Strange Darlings sounds fine, right? The images sounds fine, but it doesn't. It's that last 5% that is the tipping point often. But when you think of The Silence of the Lambs, and I hope people watch it,
Poor Things. That was the Emma Stone movie. It's Poor Things and
Oh,
then
Poor
Strange
Things.
Darlings. They're super close. But I think you're overcomplicating it. Your point on taste is dead on. I think that's a really interesting separate conversation. But in a world where the average thing that's coming out is pretty subpar and it's getting hype and it's generating view count, that's not at the level of taste. It's just basic execution to just get eyeballs. People are so hungry for good movies and good TVs. For it to be compared to Silence of the Lambs, we're literally dying to just consume something better than a Hallmark movie. Like, it's just like Spider-Man's 14th version. Like, we're so hungry for it. So your level on taste is at a point for demand where, like, the bar is so low right now in production that they really shit the bed. Mm-hmm. to not make this like a movie that's like a must-see movie. There's
it's a crime that it's not as successful as it should be.
No, right now everyone is just dying to watch something decent.
No, something like Silence of the Lambs. You know, because they don't come across.
Like, the fact that they messed that up is such a huge failure that it's not even at the level of like how iPhone is now, like, you know, losing the plot on UI UX. Like, it's.
That was an interesting discussion we had in Brooklyn and New York City. I don't know if